Hello, class. This is our recorded lecture. Since we missed class, I wasn't able to make it to campus on Friday, so we're going to finish up our lecture here about theory of mind. I'll go over briefly what we talked about in class together and then go on beyond that. And so first we started discussing what is meant by mind, and we've discussed this a few times in class and how it's distinct from the brain. Right? The brain is the physical organ, while the mind is the subjective and conscious experiences associated with that organ. So we don't really have a conscious perception of the organ inside of our head, right? As you sit there and listen to my voice and think about these concepts, you're not directly conscious or perceiving the brain. You're not aware of the organ inside your skull, but you're aware of yourself. You're aware of your own experiences, the stimuli you're perceiving, your perceptions, your feelings, your emotions, your thoughts, all of these things. This is what is meant by the mind. The relationship between the two is complex and not fully understood, though in neuroscience and psychology it is assumed that the organ, the brain, gives rise to the mind, manifests the mind, and then the mind does not come from anything else, that it is based in the material world, and it's a product of the brain. And as such, this is and because it's not fully understand how it is, the mind is, or the brain gives rise to the mind. This remains a central topic in psychology, neuroscience, philosophy, and specifically philosophy of the mind. In class, we talked about Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher, and what he thought, and the thinking of the time, that what humans, the existence of the mind is the primary feature that separated us, humans, from the rest of the animal world, as animals were thought to only follow their instincts for survival. René Descartes, considered the father of modern philosophy and science and math, thought that animals, like Aristotle, but perhaps a more extreme version, thought that the animal instincts were indistinguishable from a robot's mechanical responses to stimuli. So animals were simply just responding to stimuli just like a mechanical robot would. In class, we discussed how this started to change a little bit with the discovery that Darwin had made of natural selection. And he thought that if biological evolution, as he theorized, hypothesized, was true, that which included that tenet of common descent, that it was much more likely that instead of the mind being a unique and new evolutionary feature of just humans, that the mind and the ability to reason probably was possessed by other animals, and not just humans. And it probably lay on a continuum. And so perhaps our minds lie on this sort of continuum, at the far end of the continuum, differing in degree from other animals rather than differing in kind. And in class we talked about, just right at the end, what are some of the evidences that we might see to support Darwin's assumptions. And we talked a little bit about sort of what we might describe as more intelligent or sophisticated behaviors and cognitive abilities, such as tool use and cultural transmission. But does solving complex problems, for example, like we saw in some videos of New Caledonian crows, does that mean that you need reason to solve complex problems? So this person, Ivan Pavlov, would say no. He discovered what we call today classical conditioning, also known as Pavlovian conditioning, named after Pavlov himself, and thought that animals' behaviors were mechanistic responses to punishment and reward, so thought that they were mechanistic in the same way that Descartes viewed them as well. And so thinking about this, so instead of using reason, he thought that animals were just little machines responding to punishment or reward. Does that sound familiar at all? We discussed a story about a very smart horse near the beginning of the semester, as smart as a 14-year-old in algebra and math. But it turned out that clever Hans was just was subject to classical conditioning, responding to a reward. Knew that if he stopped tapping his foot, given specific postural cues from his trainer, that he would be rewarded with something to eat. So perhaps animals can't reason, like at least in that way, and they're just responding mechanistically to rewards and punishment. So I want to take a brief moment here to talk about classical conditioning, so that we're familiar with this as a concept, as a mechanism here. And so I guess let me define classical conditioning right here. So classical conditioning in its simplest form is learning and association between two stimuli through repeated pairing. And so this occurs when a response, which at first elicited by one stimulus, is eventually elicited by the other stimulus. And so let me draw this out to make sure that this makes sense to you. I think pictures often are better than words. And this gives me an opportunity to showcase my fantastic drawing skills. And we're going to use, I'm going to illustrate here in a simple form, Pavlov's famous first experiments in which he discovered classical conditioning. All right, and there we go. So this is clearly a dog. And we can say present this dog with some food, like a delicious cartoon chicken bone, chicken leg. And so we would call this, in this case right here, this is a stimulus, no doubt about it. And this stimulus naturally, it automatically triggers a response in the dog. Triggers a response. And so because this stimulus triggers the response naturally, we would say that this is unconditioned. And I'll write this in green so it stands out because it's important to know. And specifically, this is our unconditioned stimulus. Unconditioned stimulus. And our response in the dog, right, is automatic. So I'm going to draw some drops of saliva, right, and a little puddle of wet saliva because this dog is very hungry. And so this right here is our response. It's the natural, specifically the automatic and natural response. So that natural or automatic response is what we would call, can you guess? The unconditioned response. And again, that's an important one to know. All right, so far so good. This is pretty simple, nothing exciting, right? You show a hungry dog food and it'll salivate. Well, let's do another experiment on, oh boy, these drawings are getting more far-fetched, aren't they? I assure you, this is still a dog. Perhaps a dachshund. Okay. So now we're going to do our experiment just a little bit different. Same dog. Same hungry dog. Same chicken leg. I know it looks different, but I assure you it's the same. And what I'm attempting to draw here is a bell for ringing. And I'll write ring here so as not to confuse you. And so we present the chicken leg with the ringing of a bell to the hungry dog. So not just the food stimulus, but now this ringing of the bell. And because they happen at the same time, it is an association. So just two events, two stimuli at the same time constitutes an association. Now, what are we doing here? Well, we are pairing or associating the unconditioned stimulus with the ringing of a bell, which is a neutral stimulus. And we'll just sort of assume here that this is sort of a unique bell, and the dog is, this may be the first time the dog has ever heard this bell before. Okay? Now, we know that the unconditioned stimulus will lead to an unconditioned, the unconditioned stimulus will lead to an unconditioned response, right? So our dog still salivates because that's a delicious chicken leg there. And our dog, she's still hungry, right? Now, but something interesting happens because of this association, especially if we do this multiple times. Especially if, let's we do this, 5 days in a row. Every time we give them the food, we do this association 5 times in a row. So, but on our 6th day, I'm really trying here to make it better, but it just isn't happening. What is going on with that head? Okay, a little hairdo there. We're morphing into a poodle. So on our 6th day, we're going to present the dog. We're going to play a little trick here. And the dog is going to be presented with just the bell ringing. And lo and behold, what we find, and the same thing that Pavlov found, was that despite the fact that there is no food in sight, this dog is salivating. And previously, it's important to point out, even though I didn't draw this here, the neutral stimulus, right, when presented to the dog as a neutral stimulus, the dog would not salivate. Right, so it salivates to a chicken leg, but if you just walk up to the dog and ring a bell, he just kind of looks at you like, "What are you doing? I'm hungry. Give me some food." But when we pair it, when we associate it with the unconditioned stimulus, especially over repeated periods of time, what we see is that when we present just the neutral stimulus by itself, it will give us that salivation response. All right, so this now, instead of being a neutral stimulus, is now what we would call a conditioned stimulus. Now, I didn't write that in a different color, but let's circle it in red to denote that this is an important term to know. And as a response, this is a new response because it is in response to a conditioned stimulus. Forgot the E there. The conditioned response. And I'll circle this in red too, because it is important to know. And so a conditioned stimulus here, I'm going to write a little definition here for the conditioned stimulus, since I have a definition for the unconditioned stimulus up there. So conditioned stimulus is a neutral stimulus. And this neutral stimulus elicits a response. Through association with an unconditioned stimulus. And I'll underline this in green because we did it in green before. And so a neutral stimulus can become a conditioned stimulus only via pairing with an unconditioned stimulus. And so this is classical conditioning. Learning an association between two different stimuli. And in animals, right, we can test whether or not this association has been learned through a behavioral response. And in this case, this conditioned response of salivating, which is what Pavlov found in his experiments with his dogs. So very interesting, though. This doesn't necessarily get us any closer to wondering if animals have a mind rather than just a brain, because classical conditioning could be explained just through sort of the neurological mechanistic responses to reward and punishment, right? Classical conditioning can take the approach, this is what we call an award approach, because it's learning to associate it with an award, the food, but punishment can be the same too. It can be it can show a conditioned fear response in a conditioned stimulus. Might be something that was previously innocuous, but if it was paired with something negative like an electrical shock, it would be conditioned to fear this previously neutral stimulus. And that would then become a conditioned fear stimulus. Right, so this can be applied to punishments and rewards. Now, so this example that we just looked at of Pavlov's dogs in classical conditioning is what might be termed the easy problem in philosophy of mind, this branch of philosophy, trying to understand the mind. And so what do I mean by the easy problem? And so this is basically, what is the easy problem? It is asking the questions like, how does the brain integrate information? How does the brain perceive the environment? Right, both facets of cognition, of course, but this is relatively easy to do, and it is a fairly mechanistic. We have pretty good understanding of, the nitty-gritty cellular, molecular, genetic underpinnings of information integration and perception of the environment. A perception of stimuli, right? So how does visual visible light radiation wavelengths of visible light get encoded in the brain? Where does it go? How does it get processed? We know these things. That's pretty straightforward. The hard problem, on the other hand, is at the heart of why we have philosophy of mind, is trying to understand the hard problem, trying to understand things like consciousness and self-awareness. So we might say the hard problem is questioning the how and why. The how and why physical processes in the brain, so the organ, how do those physical processes give rise to things like subjective experiences, to things like consciousness, and to things like self-awareness. To things like theory of mind, right, which sort of suggests a need for a need for self-awareness. So this very much is a question, a hard problem. Question. This theory of mind. Question. So let's, there's certain things that I won't be able to show in this video. I will have posted videos of 3 videos. And the first one that I'd like you to watch right now is a clip that shows Alex the gray. It was an African gray parrot named Alex, and was the sort of focal point of the life work of Irene Pepperberg. It was a very famous cognitive psychologist, behavioral, animal behavioralist, studying Alex and his amazing cognitive ability. So just take a look there and think about, while you're watching it, and taking a look at some of the things that Alex can do, some of the problems that he can solve, and ask yourself, If this could be most easily explained through classical conditioning, simple mechanistic responses to reward, or do you think it necessitates a higher level of reasoning, which suggests at some level a mind, maybe not on par with Homo sapiens, but a mind nonetheless? So now that you've seen Alex, and we've considered some pretty amazing cognitive abilities in non-human animals by just watching Alex's ability to use a fairly robust vocabulary, to name objects and to answer questions, and to voice seemingly his own desires. Let's consider the theory of mind. This is something that we've mentioned in class before, so you should already know what this is. But here's our definition here and written out. The theory of mind refers to the ability to attribute mental states, such as beliefs, desires, intentions, emotions, and knowledge, to oneself and others. So understanding that different individuals have different thoughts, feelings, and perspectives, and that these mental states can influence behavior. It allows individuals to recognize that others have minds with beliefs and intentions that may differ from their own. Now, in humans, a theory of mind goes through a pretty well documented development. We can see this. You can see this in small children. So, if you have kids, younger siblings, nieces, nephews, maybe you've worked at a place, volunteered at a place with young children, these things may be obvious, but perhaps you've never sort of consciously thought much about them or considered them in sort of the human's natural progression in their own cognitive development. So these are some of the landmarks that we see, that right around 1 year of age, give or take a handful of months, we see a phenomenon called joint attention. And this is the first step towards a theory of mind. The ability to share attention with others, follow someone else's gaze or point. So if you take a very young infant and you try to get them to follow a point, right? A 6-month-old baby isn't going to look at the direction that you're looking or look to where you're pointing. So you can't really show them. You have to sort of turn them towards, say, like, look at the Christmas tree. You have to turn the infant and walk the infant up to the Christmas tree and put it right in front of them. You can't hold them and have the Christmas tree right next to you and look at the Christmas tree and point to it. The baby's still going to just look right at you. Because it doesn't have this ability of joint attention. But around 1 year of age, this first develops. Around year 2, another stepping stone towards theory of mind develops, understanding others' intentions. So a 2-year-old recognizes that others have intentions and that other people can pursue goals. All right, so this is may not be that intuitive or easily seen or understood, but it takes about 2 years before an individual understands that others are pursuing goals, others have intentions. And we don't have what we would consider a full-blown theory of mind until about age 4 or 5. And we call this understanding false beliefs. And they have the ability to understand that someone else may hold a belief that is different from reality, indicating a more sophisticated understanding of mental states. And just as I was actually preparing for this lecture that I ended up not being able to give in person, I was giving a bath to my 3-year-old daughter, about 3.5 years old. So someone who has the ability, presumably, that others have to know that others have intentions, but not yet an understanding of false belief. So I decided, and we had not done this. I've done it on our other two kids, my older two children, but not our youngest. So what a great time, as it was fresh in my mind, to test this. So we like to play a game in which there's little plastic fish in the bathtubs, and there's there's seemingly more toys than there is water in the bathtub. But my daughter Zinzi will close her eyes, and I have to constantly remind her to keep them closed as I hide the fish around the bathtub, and they hide under the water and in little cups, or perhaps up around on the little soap shelves in the bathtub, or in some little clever spots that are hard to find. Some are easy, and this is a very fun game. And she likes to hide them for me as well. So I decided to test this theory of mine first. I got this initial notion because she wanted to hide them up high, sort of where there are plastic, bathtub shower insert meets the dry wall of the bathroom, up near the shower head. It's a little shelf where the little fish can fit on. And so she wanted to hide them up there because I had previously hid one up there. And she got very excited about hiding them up high for me. But she couldn't reach it, so she asked me to lift her up. And she put all of the 5 fish up there and then I put her back down in the bathtub, and then she asked me to find them. And she was just as delighted as ever. And this game is just as exciting as it's ever been. Though clearly, from my perspective and from everyone else's perspective, anyone else that was in the bathroom would have clearly have known that I would have known where they were because I lifted her up. But she didn't seem to make that connection. She was just as excited for me to look and try to find. It's your turn, try to find the fish now, Daddy. So I did a more formal test that mirrors what we would see in the human tests that they give to children. And so I had my wife come in, and we had 2 different containers. We put them on the edge of the tub, and I showed Zinzi while my wife was in the room that I'm going to put the red fish under the blue container, and then I put the green fish under the white container. And then I asked my wife to leave the bathroom, and then I very obviously lifted up the containers and showed Zinzi that I was switching the fish, and put them back down. And then I asked her mother to come back in, and told Zinzi, I'm going to ask Mommy to find the red fish. Where do you think she's going to look for the red fish? And she pointed to where I had switched the red fish. She pointed to where I had just put the red fish, rather than the container where Sarah had seen the red fish hidden under. And this is what you would expect from a 3.5-year-old that doesn't have a theory of mind yet. They saw me switch the red fish. I can't remember where I put it the first time. The red fish under the blue container, and then I switched it to the white container. And so she sees the red fish go under the white container. There's no reason, no ability in her mind to understand that the whole rest of the world would not know that the red fish is under the white container. Of course it's there. Everyone knows that because that's where it is. Or she doesn't even have a concept of everyone else knows. It's just that's the red fish under the white container. And we repeated the test. We switched roles. I was the one that left the room, did it slightly different, where we had just one fish under one container, under the blue container. I left the room and Sarah switched them. And then I came back in and asked Cincy, where's Daddy? Daddy's going to find the fish. Which container will he lift up? And she pointed to the white one, which is where the fish was secretly hidden, demonstrating that she didn't have a theory of mind. So an interesting anecdote. Now, I want you to watch the second video now, which is a relatively short video showing you some variations on similar tests for children that demonstrates these different stepping stones for the theory of mind development in humans. Okay, now that you've seen that in humans, I want you to consider the paper that you read, and many of you handed in your responses. And I think, all right, if you reflect on that paper, I think what it demonstrates in the take-home messages, right, is that there are some, first, that theory of mind is quite difficult to test in non-human animals. And at the end of the day, from all the experiments that have been done, we're still not confident in knowing that non-human animals have a theory of mind. And right, and what is the major problem that gets in the way, that prevents us from making a strong inference towards that, given the types of tests that we've done? So, take a minute to think about it and pause the video if you'd like. But the answer is what we sort of went over previously, the Pavlov's problem. That seemingly these experiments could be explained by classical conditioning, mechanistic responses, learning, in much the same way that clever Hans learned to do seemingly complex cognitive mathematical computations, but just through classical conditioning, was able to figure out what the trainers wanted him to do, or more, to put it in a more accurate way, what he had to do in order to get the reward. And it may be the same for these experiments done primarily with apes, that they're just responding to classical conditioning. So a little bit of, I don't know if you have the similar responses to me, given this, the literature, and there are a number of different reviews on theory of mind in non-human animals. This one's a fairly good synopsis, at least for its time. It's over 10 years old now. But it leaves you perhaps a little bit deflated without any sort of strong evidence towards his theory of mind. Though things that are, suggestive, somewhat compelling, but unfortunately conditioning can't be ruled out. Now, I want you to consider this third and last video that I have posted. I'd like you to watch this. And this is a more recent, a short video that just highlights theory of mind tests using a new form of technology that wasn't available at the time in those studies that you read in the review that I assigned to the class. These are theory of mind studies that are conducted using eye tracking software. So repeating these tests with primarily great apes using eye tracking software as they watch videos and scenes to see where their attention is, to perhaps make a better inference of whether or not they might have a theory of mind. So I want you to consider that as you watch the video and ask yourself if you think that this gives us a little bit more evidence that theory of mind does exist in non human animals.